there's definitely nervousness in terms of tariffs and what that's going to mean. But I actually believe it's really about demand. I mean, demand is more robust when it comes to chips, AI revolution, NVIDIA, than it was 4 months ago.
Does Wedbush model out a 5% China GDP, as President Xi talked about? Does that diffuse across the Pacific Rim?
Look, I think ultimately a stronger China, more stimulus, is more bullish for Apple. It's more bullish for Tesla in terms of everything we see in China, as just how important those markets are.
Paul, Apple or Tesla first? You make the call.
I'll go Tesla. Tesla sales fall 76% in Germany amid Musk electioneering. That's the Bloomberg headline. We've seen that in other markets as well. As an analyst who's followed this company from day one and you model out demand, how frustrating is it for you to see some of these sales numbers and you're like, we really don't need to see those kinds of sales numbers. What's he doing?
Look, well, first off, I mean, 70% of it is actually really more refreshes inventory year over year. So the numbers sound scary, white knuckle, but the reality is probably about 10 to 15% of what's going on is what I'll call Musk brand deterioration, Doge. But no doubt, look, we just continue to view it as the bet for the ages for Musk is on Trump. Deregulatory, autonomous, that continues to be, that's the goal. That's what I think worth $1 trillion.
Have we gotten the market away from making cars? So is it about AI? Is it about autonomous? Is it about robot? Has he been successful in shifting the focus away from making cars?
Look, I think 90% of the value of Tesla going forward is Optimus autonomous rather than actual vehicle.
Really? Wow.
Is there evidence that's a revenue and profit reality for them, or is that technology and innovation?
It's a great question.
Talk.
It's a great look. FSD today, 15% of Teslas in terms of owners have full self-driving. That gets to 50% numbers.
Is there evidence that we'll get to 50%?
And I believe
I got people, Dan Ives, in New York canceling Ubers that are Teslas. They don't want to drive in Elon Musk's car.
Mm-hmm.
There's people putting black on the label. Germany, as Paul mentions, Europe rather, it's falling off a cliff. Do you see a management away from a distracted Musk going, let's fix this, or does it fester?
I think as wild in the near term, I think it's contained. In other words, we're talking, call it low single digit as a contained issue. Look, is it a risk, especially given what we're seeing in terms of some of the worries in Europe and especially in the US? But it all comes down to they are going to own the autonomous race in the US and I believe ultimately globally. And for Musk, when you view even some of the brand worries and deteriorations, I view it almost as near-term noise relative to the longer-term sort of value in the story.
How about just in terms of time spent? Part of the bullish case for Tesla over the years was it's a bet on Elon Musk, and that is a great bet to make. I don't know what the number is, but it feels like 50, 60, 70, 80% of his time and effort is down in Washington. So does that in and of itself take away from the
perception's reality, right? So I think that is also playing into what's happening in the stock because the view is that he's not dialed in Tesla, just focused in DC. But I do believe that that's not true. I do believe he...
Okay, I got 400 back to 273. I got a trading range off COVID that's banded between 200 and 300 to be polite. Do you have is there a Dan Ives price where you pull the cord?
I mean, this thing... At these levels, and it gets into the mid 200s,
right? I
believe it is generational in terms of this type of sell-off where I ultimately see Tesla over the coming year. I think Tesla's going to be a $2 trillion market cap. I mean, look, it's a growth scare, right? I mean, if you look at the tariffs, I mean, the concern is like, what does this mean for the AI trade, chips, export controls? It's added uncertainty. But in my opinion, it doesn't change the demand cycle. In other words, this is not going to end the tech bull market. It's a scare, but I believe it's more opportunities than time to head for the hills.
What is that opportunity, Dan? I guess where is that opportunity?
I mean, look, I continue to think Mag 7, when you look stronger and get stronger in terms of this tech trade. I mean, we just came back from Asia, demand 15 to 1 for NVIDIA when it comes to next gen chips. That's not changing. So the point is that I think when you're able to kind of go through periods like this, and I get that there's a lot of uncertainty, but just as we navigated tariffs in 18 and 19, and just like we've navigated other macro issues, That's our view. It is the time to own the winners. You look at these names like an NVIDIA. You look at names like Palantir. You look what I believe Apple, which is obviously holding up very strong, and a lot of the other Mag 7, Microsoft, Alphabet, and others.
So, Dan, is this very much more so driven by macro concerns rather than sector-specific concerns?
I think 70% macro. I mean, the worry is like you just don't know rules of the game. So you don't know when you wake up, whether it's US or Asia, what's coming out of the 202 error code. Retaliatory, what does it mean? It adds uncertainty. And obviously, like in the risk-on environment, you've seen risk off. You see what happens in the 10-year. And now you're seeing growth investors just get more and more concerned. But when it comes to tech, even on some of the knee jerks like a Marvell or, Mongo and others, take a step back. Like the AI trade and the strength is just going to continue to accelerate.
Dan, are those gains, though, capped until we get some more clarity on the macro front when it comes especially here to tariffs?
Yeah, I think it's range bound. I wouldn't necessarily say it's range bound, but it does speak to our view that this is all a game of high stakes poker. If you think tariffs are going to continue and you start the trajectory out when it lasts through 2026, then all bets are off. But as we all know, I mean, this is all a game that ultimately is about negotiations. That's how Trump goes about it. And, my view is being in DC, called 3-4 weeks ago, and even, being in Asia, my sense is like cooler heads prevail. And you're going to get to deals. And I think a lot of this is ultimately going to be bark worse than bite. But it's nervous. And that's creating this sort of angst and white knuckle period that we're seeing.
Dan, I'm curious, how would you assess, or what is your assessment so far of the tech industry's approach here to the Trump administration? There's a report out this morning that tech leaders are going to be meeting once again with Trump's administration next week. What do the next several years look like here under this administration?
Look, it's embracing, right? I mean, much different than sort of arm's length and almost much more of a negative view in terms of first administration. Look, I think there's a few things. One, for the first time in 30 years, tech's leading, in U.S. versus China. Because of AI, because of the trade, because of NVIDIA, because of ultimately what we've seen in terms of the AI revolution really being a U.S. story, right? Even when it comes to DeepSeek, obviously the Singapore story and everything else, you realize that was a lot different than maybe what I initially thought. When it comes to Europe, I think there's a view like they're done with the big brothers watching. Like they want U.S. to have much more strong arm tactics in terms of some of the frustration that tech companies have faced. So I do think it's much more of an embracing of the Beltway and Trump administration, especially relative to what we saw in Trump first administration.
Let's talk about what is going on on a global scale, because you have Alibaba launching potentially this DeepSeek rival. That's obviously causing some ripple effects here in the markets this morning. I'm curious, is it a threat to U.S.'s AI dominance?
See, I don't view it as a threat just because it always goes back to DeepSeek, 6 million not using next-gen NVIDIA hardware. I mean, that the same chance as I'm playing in the NBA this week, right? So the reality is that Baba, we're bullish on Baba. And I don't view it as necessarily a competitive threat because it's just a matter of time until Apple and Alibaba partner. And ultimately, Baba is going to be Apple's partner when it comes to AI in China. Innovation is going to continue to increase more and more. These models, more enterprise going down the path, whether it's China or US. Export controls will be there, but the reality is there's only one chip in the world that's fueling AI revolution. It's godfather of AI, Jensen NVIDIA.
Dan, outside of the Mag 7, outside of names like NVIDIA, what do you like?
I think it's in software. I think you look at name of Messi of AI, Palantir, you look at Salesforce.com. I think Mongo is selling off like this is a huge opportunity. Look at names like Snowflake. I think more and more software on the use cases is going to be the ones that benefit. And again, I think we're going to look at this as a growth scare, but not something that dramatically changes our view of the trajectory where tech's going next few years.
So Dan, it sounds like you're buying the dip here?
Oh, I think that's been our playbook, for decades. Like, it's easy, the macro, right? It scares you. And then you look back and be like, why didn't I own the winners? Why didn't I own the dip? But it just comes down to in the chaos creates opportunities, and that's our view.